Is Urban Decay running out of ideas, or are they actually geniuses in bringing back the original Naked palette? Hey y'all, it's Heather, and I'm so excited because today we're going to be comparing my original Urban Decay Naked palette from 2010 to the original Urban Decay Naked palette from 2024. I went to Ulta today and I asked them if they had the re-released version, and I'm so excited that I got my hands on this. I want to do swatches, I want to do looks, I want to see how does this compare to the older version. This one was from 2010. This palette really was a trendsetter. It was the palette, the neutral palette to have. It did have a brush with it, and it was $44 at the time of release. Urban Decay discontinued the original palette back in 2018. They had a whole video funeral for it. It was a big deal, but now they have brought her back for a limited time. This palette was $59 at Ulta today, but you know, in 14 years, I'm not surprised to see the price increase. We've been seeing that with makeup for a while now. Is this palette worth picking up in 2024? We know that cool tones are coming back. They're having a moment right now for sure. Not that they were ever gone. I mean, neutrals are always in, but we definitely had years and years of warm tone shadows, which I absolutely love. But the original Urban Decay palette is definitely neutral, does definitely lean cool tone. I want to get a feel. I want to do two different looks and see how does this palette perform. So I'm gonna grab an eye primer, I'm gonna zoom you in closer, and we'll create. We're gonna use the 2024 version of this palette over here on this eye, and I'm gonna start off my look with this shade right here called Buck. I'm gonna use the brush that comes in the palette since I have it now, and I'm gonna put that shade right here in the socket of my eye. So I'm just gonna kind of press it in my socket. I'm gonna bring it above, below. Doesn't have to be super precise right now, but I'm just gonna press the shadow on first, and then I'm gonna blend a bit. And this is so cool tones on me. If you have a cool leaning skin tone, then it will probably show up more like true neutral, but the contrast against my warm olive skin is having it show up way more cool toned, like even than it looks in the pan. We don't have to be perfectly blended at this point. We can go back and blend more in a minute. I'm just kind of getting that color on where I want it. This is the shade Buck from the old Naked palette. And look at how that's a different color. Like, that is a different color. These are not extremely different, but I mean, this eye right here is definitely more cool, more gray, and this one over here does have more of a neutral lean to it. Still a cool neutral, but it definitely is not as cool as this side over here. I know that you already saw the swatches, but I'm like, I want to swatch those two side by side because seeing them on my eyes, I'm like, similar but different colors definitely. And you can see the bottom is the 2010 version, the discontinued version, and then this is the re-released version. So similar, but this one definitely is nowhere near as cool toned as this one. The next shade I'm going to use is Creep right here, this deep dark black color. I'm going to take this shade and I'm just going to press it on my lid right out here in the outer portion of my lid, and I'm slowly going to bring it up and out to create like not a wing because it's not going to be sharp, we're going to blend it, but just creating kind of an angle with the shadow. Once I have it kind of set like that, I kind of pressed it off my brush because I don't want to just go in swiping with this dark black shadow. I want to press it off and then I can go in and I can blend. Now I did already like set my under eye with powder. You can do your face first, like whatever you want to do, but I know myself and I know that I can be like a little messy with shadows, so I usually just powder my under eye so I can brush away if I get any fallout. But now that that shade is on, I'm just going to lightly blend. I want it to come down to my lid here, and then I want it to come up and out and just lightly kind of fade that in. Again, I'm not worried about everything being perfectly blended right now. Like I can go back and blend more in a minute. I'm just kind of creating the shape I need right here. Now I will list and link my brushes and eyeshadow primer and everything I can possibly think of. Same shade Creep from my 2010 version, the original if you will. And I think this is still performing nicely. Now I am having to pick up a little more shadow on my brush and build it a little more than I did over here. But I mean, the effect is pretty similar. I'm just doing the same exact placement and not having any trouble blending or anything like that. Let's use this shade right here called Gunmetal for our lower lash line. I want to just kind of make this a little dramatic. I want to test these deeper, darker shades, see how they perform, how they blend, and that's really pretty. The original Urban Decay palette is very like shimmer heavy. It has shimmers and metallics, but it does not have very many mattes. Like some of the shades I can use maybe where I would a matte, like that kind of, not matte with sparkle, but that deeper shade is more like a satin with the sparkle. And I really think that looks super pretty. Now using this kind of gunmetal, well, it's called gunmetal. That's a good word for it. Kind of more like shimmer shadow right here on the lower lash line is working really well too. Blending well, I'm not having any issues. So let me grab my Sigma switch so I can clean off my brush, and we'll do the same thing over here. Let's see if this shade blends just as well. Interesting. This shade is performing nicely. I'm definitely having to pick a little more shadow up on my brush, like kind of dip back into the pan and build it a little bit more. But I mean, the palette is very old, so that could definitely have something to do with the changes. And I actually think I blended that down a little lower. But looking at myself, I feel like this is a little more like blue-based gray, which I didn't feel like before I saw it next to this older 2010 version, where this is definitely more like a silvery gray. So let me swatch that on the hand too, just because I'm seeing it, right? New version, older version. Let me know what you think. I definitely feel like the older version is more silvery. I want to go in with just a tiny little bit of the matte shade right here called Naked. I'm just using this shade as a little bit of like a blending color. So I'm going to take it right around my brush. I'm using a fluffy brush and I'm not picking up much shadow at all. And I'm going to just kind of sweep this back and forth around like that. This is just going to soften things up a little bit. It's not going to be like, oh my gosh, it's another shade on her eyes. It's just blending, and I'm even going to take it a little bit underneath my lower lash line, down, out, and around, and it's doing exactly what I need it to do. Same shade, same type of brush, and I'm going to do the same thing. Now, I definitely feel like just using that shade now, that this shade over here was a little more like creamy, definitely less kick up, and that's not a big deal. I feel like I'm still getting a great blend over here. Just trying to note any of the differences for y'all, because maybe you have the original and you love it. Maybe you're like a makeup lover like me and you're like, more is more. I have some, but I want more. You know, like, I totally get ya. Or maybe you've never tried this palette, but you love these types of colors. I want to let you know, like, is this good? And so I want to talk about any differences I see. We're going to use the shade Dark Horse, and then we're going to go into the shade beside it, Smog. I'm going to start with Dark Horse, and then we're going to do Smog. Those two colors are going to be our lid colors. They're going to take us to that, like, sultry look that I'm kind of going for, like dark glam. I am going to spray these shimmers with setting spray after I pick them up on my brush. I'm not going to wet my brush and then go into my shadow because, hello, I don't want bacteria to grow. I'm going to use the new watermelon fruit hyaluronic acid spray my brush, and then go in with the shadow. Now you can use whatever setting spray you want, preferably something with glycerin as an ingredient, and it will just help make the shadow be like most intense as possible. If you like to apply your makeup with your fingers, you can definitely do that because that will help bring intensity to a metallic or a shimmer. I just don't really like dipping my fingers in the makeup after I swatch it. Like, I don't like applying makeup that way, so I'm gonna use a brush and then spray it. I'm gonna press my brush down and put Dark Horse right here in the center of my lid. So depending on your eye shape, you can take this up higher if you want to. You can take it a little lower. It's going to be a really pretty effect on really any eye shape, in my opinion, to put your shimmer or your metallic right in the center, especially a deeper color like this, and then do a lighter shimmer next to it. I just love that type of look. I'm bringing it to meet that dark shade Creep that we put down first, but I'm not going to cover it. So I'm not taking it over top. I'm keeping it right here. Dark Horse from my older version right over here. You're probably like, Heather, we get it. You're doing the same eye look. Isn't that pretty. I think they both look really pretty and really smooth on the lid. Maybe a subtle difference, like maybe this one has a little more shine to it, but honestly, like it's not notable. Let's put Smog right here. This is definitely a more bronzy tone. Really pretty and not near as cool as some of the others. But that's pretty, right? Like, I'm into it. Now, if you're not new here, you know I love indie makeup. I love supporting an independently owned makeup brand. I love indie eyeshadows. So this is definitely not like multi-chromes, holochromes, anything like that. But it is very pretty and smooth and easy to work with. And I think I'm getting glam vibes. And we'll go into Smog from our older palette. Just putting it in that empty space that we left right on the inner part of our lid. And I'm taking my shimmers metallics up pretty high. Like, I don't care if I get them in the socket. I just want to have fun with my makeup. And I really like taking my shimmers metallics, all of that up. Let's go in with this shade right here called Sin. I'm not going to spray my brush for this shadow because I don't want any extra intensity. I just want to be able to fluff it on and around with my brush. So I'm putting it right there on the inner corner for some brightness. And then I'm just going to kind of blend a little bit to kind of wrap that around so that it's like a, kind of like a Pac-Man eating my inner corner. You know what I mean. We're gonna put the older version right over here. Now, something I noticed immediately when I looked at these palettes side by side is that the Sin in the discontinued version looks to be a little more like pinky, whereas it doesn't have that obvious pink undertone in the newer palette. And I'm also looking at it and I'm thinking the older version may be a little more intense. Yeah, like it's not blending as smoothly, but it's definitely a bit more intense. Here's the newer version of Sin and here's the older version of Sin. So very similar, like very similar. But if I'm being like critical looking for differences, I do feel like the older version is definitely a little more pinky, a little more cool toned. So here's the eye look side by side, 2024, 2010. I am gonna do liner and I'm gonna do a false lash because I want the drama and I will be right back. But I wanted to let you look. I'm also gonna see if I need to do any blending or anything like that. Here is my look with liner and lash. I really like this look. Now, while I was doing the look, I could definitely tell like subtle differences in the shade. And even if I really look at my eyes like critically, I can say like maybe this eye with the 2024 version is a little bit smoother of a blend, but they look the same. They look the same. You really cannot tell a difference unless you were like up close. So I'm feeling like with the shades that I used for this, it's the same. It's the same. The OG is back. I even had my son come in and look and I'm like, can you tell a difference? And he was like, no. And he like looked again. So I cannot tell a difference. I would love to know if you can tell a difference. Now, I really like this look, but I also want to create a second look doing something a little bit lighter. I want to use the other shades in the palette. And then at the end, I'll kind of give you my final thoughts. I want to wear this look. I'll also give you some recommendations for some other palettes that I feel like have a similar vibe to this. So here's one last look at our first OG naked look. For today's look, we're gonna do something a little bit lighter, a little bit more like shimmer heavy, and I do have a little bit of mascara on. I'm testing a new mascara and I always feel like I can see how it does better when I like put it on with no eyeshadow, no liner, everything like that. So just ignore the fact that I have on mascara already. I've got my eyes primed, and again, this will be our 2024 side. And I actually want to start with this shade right here called Sidecar. This looks to be the most sparkly formula, and from what I know of the original, like the older one, it is the most like sparkly shade. So again, with all my shimmers, I'm going to pick them up on a brush, and then I'm going to spray them with setting spray before I put them on my lid. Okay, let's see how Sidecar performs. That looks really pretty, like as soon as I lay it down. So I'm starting it on the lid and I'm just gonna kind of press it on. I'm gonna bring it kind of up here into my socket, almost like touching the front of my brow right there. So if you have a different eye shape and you want to bring this like all over, you can definitely do that. You can bring it up. I mean, I could do it too with my eye shape. I'm just throwing out different different suggestions if you want to like shop your stash, recreate this look, or anything. I'm just kind of like pressing that shadow on first, and then once I kind of have it pressed off my brush, I'm just going to kind of lightly blend. Let's put the same shade right over here. I'm just gonna press it on first. Is this shade darker? It looks a little darker. It's very subtle. Like, it's the same. It's the same. Now we're gonna go in with this shade. This shade is called Toasted. This shade I'm not gonna spray. I'm just gonna use it almost like I would a matte, but it's more of a metallic shadow. And I'm gonna put it right out in the kind of outer corner of my eye, like outer half of my lid. And I'm gonna leave that little center spot blank. It doesn't matter if I like blend in too far, but we are gonna cover it, so I'm not really worried about blending. I want this look to be super diffused, light, airy, ethereal vibes. Naked ethereal. Toasted from the OG over here. Can you see a difference at all? I really can't. Like, once they're applied and blended, if anything, I feel like maybe this side is a smidge darker, but you really can't tell. I do want to remind you, if you're watching on like a mobile device, something like that, there should be in one of the top corners, there's like a little icon, a tool or something. I think it's for settings, but make sure you have it to set at like the highest quality so that you can see, because I think some of these differences are very subtle, so you want to make sure that you don't have like your video resolution set to low, because I'm uploading this in super high quality so that you can see everything. I'm going to use the shade Half Baked, and I'm going to use the brush that comes in the palette, and this shade I am going to spray. Now this is going to go in the center of my lid. I'm going to take Half Baked and I'm going to kind of drag it down the center, and then I will just slowly kind of blend it, and I'm going to not bring it all the way to my brow. The only shade I really took to my brow is that first shade that we started with, but I want to just keep Half Baked right there. So we kind of have these 3 different shades on our lid, but they flow really well together. So it's like a very subtle difference, you know, nothing extreme, like dramatic, just soft but sparkly. But like as I move and go about my day, the different shimmers will like pick up in the light, and it'll just be that little subtle difference that I think is pretty and like effortless. Even though obviously this is taking some effort, it's gonna look effortless. This is another one where I really don't feel like I see a difference. Okay, so far so good. Let's go in with a little bit of our deep shade right here called Hustle. Yes, Hustle. This is the deepest shade we're gonna use, and we're gonna use it in a very like small area, almost like eyeliner. I'm gonna kind of press it on like that and just create like a little bit of a shadow right here. I'm not picking up a ton because I really don't want this to be like intense. I just want it to be that little hint of something, you know? So I'm gonna bring it just a little bit under the lower lash line, and I'm just going straight from the pan to my brush, and then I'm gonna bring it underneath. I want this to be light, okay? I want this to be light. I don't want the intensity of the shadow. I just want a little depth and definition. Let's see how this shade does. If you have the original Naked palette, like if you have this one, please let me know. I would love to hear it. Do you still use it? Do you keep it for the memories? I would love to know. I'm really liking this look, and I'm having fun with it. Now we'll go into the shade Virgin. This is kind of a satiny white shade, which I really like satins. I don't know if Urban Decay classifies this as a satin, but I think so. I would say it's not so much a shimmer because it's a little more smooth and it doesn't have the shimmer to it, but it does have a little bit of glow. So I think that's super pretty. Let me clean off my brush on a little switch, and we will go into the 2010 version, and I'm going to pop that right on my inner corner. I'm gonna wipe away any fallout that I have. I'm gonna put on some eyeliner, not to my top lashes, but just to my lower waterline. I'm gonna kind of touch up my mascara and curl my lashes, and I'll be back. But can you see a difference in the shadow looks? I really can't tell much of a difference, but I'll be back with my thoughts. All right, y'all, here is my finished look. I did put on a little bit of brown mascara on top of what I already had on and a little bit of brown in my lower waterline. And I like this look. It was so quick to do. I mean, y'all saw how quick it was, but also like if I wasn't talking to y'all and thinking about the differences, I feel like I could do this look in 2 minutes, maybe that long. Like, it's just so light and easy, and I really like it. I think it makes my green eyes pop, and I think this would look beautiful on any and every eye color. So I would love to know what you think of this palette. Do you think that Urban Decay is like out of ideas, but they wanted to do something new, so they brought this back? Do you think that they saw the trend of these kind of like neutral, cool tones, and they brought this back? Were people asking for this? Let me know your thoughts on that. Overall, I do think there's some very slight differences to the palette, but again, my palette is very, very old, so I would expect the newer one to perform just a little bit differently, but overall, I think they're the same. Like, it is the same Naked palette that they brought back. It looks the same on the eyes. I really can't tell that I used like a 14-year-old version versus a version that just came out. Like, I can't tell when looking at my eye look. I like my looks. I will say when I'm going for neutrals, I do prefer a warm tone shadow or an olive leaning neutral. It just makes it so easy with my skin tone. It's just like, I love. But I do think cooler tones, more neutrally tones can kind of like contrast on my skin, which can be equally beautiful. It's just all a matter of personal preference. And I love all makeup. Like, I may have one that I prefer, but I really love it all. Like, I don't discriminate here. I just love makeup. I want to show you some palettes that I have in my collection that I think you could use to get a similar vibe. Maybe you just want some cool tones and you want some recommendations other than this palette. Maybe you want to shop your stash. Let me know what you think is kind of similar to this, but I'll show you my picks too. I was thinking, if you want this type of palette, like you kind of like this color story, but you're thinking, I don't need that many shades, I think Sigma has a couple of quads that would really kind of like give you similar-esque looks. This is the Creme Brulee quad from Sigma, and it's not as cool as the shades in here. It's a little bit on that more neutral side of the scale. Like, if you're sitting at neutral, you're leaning cool, you're leaning warm. This is kind of sitting closer to the center of neutral. We've got a beautiful like satiny shimmer. We've got a beautiful like foiled metallic shimmer in here. And then we've got two beautiful matte shades, one of them being a mid-tone and one of them being a deeper tone. So I think you could get something similar if you don't want quite as many options. Now, also from Sigma, if you like the more cool aspect of this, I pulled the Tiramisu quad. And with this one, again, you do have a shimmer that's more intense. It's not as foiled as the other quad. You do have a more like smooth, almost satin shimmer, and then you have two mattes, both mid-tone and deep, so you can kind of get the more cool tone. And if you want to pair these together, you could definitely get an array of looks out of these 8 shades in the 2 Sigma quads if you weren't wanting to commit to like a full Urban Decay palette. If you want a drugstore option, I pulled ColourPop's 1111 palette because this really is a neutral palette that has some interesting color choices. I do feel like overall it leans more neutral cool because we kind of have these shades over here. And with this palette, we do have multiple different formulas. You do have that kind of matte with the sparkle shade. You do have some smoother shimmers, some more intense shimmers. And this one isn't like a dupe. I'm not saying any of these are dupes, nothing like that. I'm just saying similar vibes, similar types of looks, you know, and this is at a ColourPop price point. So I will, of course, link all of these down below. I'll use YouTube shopping, all of that, but it's the 1111 palette, and I think it could be a good alternative if you don't want to spend the almost $60 on this palette. If you want another alternative to the palette and you, like me, love Natasha Denona, I think her Glam palette is a good option for the Urban Decay. Natasha Denona makes one of my favorite formulas of eyeshadow, and her Glam palette is less on the mattes. It's more heavy on the shimmers and sparkle, just like the original Naked palette, but in elevated formulas. And this palette is actually only $10 more, and you get 15 shades here, where you only get how many shades here? 12 shades here. I had to count for a second. So definitely more expensive, but if you're looking for something like that, I think You can't go wrong with Natasha Denona. But I do really enjoy this Urban Decay. Like, I enjoyed playing with this palette, kind of like revisiting my collection, pulling it out, having a good time. I would love to know what you think of Urban Decay bringing this back. And if you love cool tones, I recently did a video on the best cool tone palettes. I love makeup. I could talk about it all day. I love eyeshadow. If you love makeup, you are in the right place. Definitely check out some of my other videos.